One other thing that I quite like about that you're integrating it into stories quite early on is it's not really something that I hear many people speak about, but one thing that influences memory more than most other things is emotions. Like I don't know, like if you're invested and you've emotionally invested like 10 years of your life into your girlfriend and she breaks up with you, you're not going to forget that. It only happens once, but you're never going to forget it, right? So
right, exactly.
It's the same thing with a story. If you feel like you've got incredibly invested into a TV show or even a graded reader or a book, when you get invested in these characters and you're following them on the journey and they're pulling out the emotional chord strings, that is such a good memory device as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I did this webinar a couple of years ago, just called about how my personal experiences helped me learn Chinese. And like at every layer, like one of the things I tell people all the time at the beginning of Mandarin Blueprint, I say, the biggest advantage you have over a child is that you already have experiences in life that you can glean from and attach new knowledge to. So almost anything that you've experienced has the potential to help you learn something, because you try to learn a random fact about Chinese in isolation, it's not very likely to be remembered just by itself as a random fact. But if you instead say, okay, what do I associate with this? So like you learn the word xisheng, okay, sacrifice. You can try to learn that by itself in isolation. But then I thought, what do I think of as like an ultimate sacrifice? And you just let your brain just send you whatever. Don't like feel like you're, oh, what is it? What do I think of as sacrifice? Just say sacrifice. What does this remind me of? And just see what comes up. And for me, I thought of that scene from the Pixar movie Inside Out. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I haven't. But
okay, well, there's a scene, I won't give it away the moment, but there's a very sacrificial scene in it where an imaginary friend goes away. And it's like so emotional. It's like I've never met anybody who I asked, I was like, did you shed a tear at that moment? And they're always like, yes. And so, it's an emotional scene. And so if you just associate that thing that which is a scene from a movie, to the Chinese word, then it will help you remember. And sometimes it's sort of mysterious why that works, but I think it's just that the things are firing in your brain at the same time. Like the knowledge of this new word and the memory that you're pulling up. I don't know. It's almost like the energy that moves between the neurons through the axon. It's almost like they're welding together almost, it's sort of just I'm sure that's not how it works technically. A neuroscientist could tell me that, but like, it's just how I imagine it, because it does seem to work so well just to have the emotion in whatever context sort of mixed together in that moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the way I think about it is when we're learning Chinese, people relate it to the English word. So you think, if you think of like the Chinese word for dog, like gao, and then you relate that to dog in like the English word, you just got that one tiny piece of information. Or that if you think about dog in your native language, what would you think about? You wouldn't think about, I don't know, like the Korean word for dog or something, would you? You think about maybe your pet Labrador or your friend's dog, or I don't know, like the Story Lassie, or like all these different breeds, or whippets and racing.
The time you got bit by a dog.
The time you got bit by a dog, yeah. So
yeah,
I think, I don't know, I feel like language fundamentally connects to feeling and emotion on such a fundamental level, because because at the end of the day, they're just sounds until we attach meaning to it. So if you're getting your meaning from life experiences like we do in our native language, that's why, why we remember stuff so well. You don't think, oh, mama, it sounds like mum. But actually, you think about, if you say it in English, you think about your actual mum and what you did growing up as a kid and all that stuff. So I think it really makes sense that way. So I guess going on you mentioned there, relating life experiences to different components in a character, I guess, which was kind of like what Heisig suggested it doing as well in the most of their book. And I think it's also sort of what you do with learning characters. I remember it's the movie, I forget what the name is called, the movie method or something.
Hence the movie method.
Yeah. So you're going to tell me a bit about the movie method, and I think it also links in like memory palaces as well, right?
Yeah, essentially. So basically, you've got the pinyin chart and the Mandarin set of syllables, which are luckily relatively small. There's only about 420 or so syllables discounting tones. And so as a result of that, you can actually somewhat systemize how you learn the primary pronunciation of a character. Now, many characters have multiple pronunciations, but very rarely are the primary and secondary pronunciation equally important. Sometimes, Chang and Zhang are both like really important as an example, but most of the time it's the primary one matters. So learn that first, and then later you'll be able to, through context, figure out the other pronunciations. So if let's take Chang, for example, okay, it starts off with CH. That's your initial, CH. All right, fine. CH sounds like a lot of English names. Charlie, for example. My uncle is Uncle Chuck, right? So it's like I could have my Uncle Chuck be a representation of CH. So that's personal, right? Now, ANG is the final, okay? That reminds me of Ang Lee from the comic book writer, right? And so I might but that's a person. I want this to be related to a place, but maybe I think of, okay, that reminds me of Ang Lee, which reminds me of comic books, which reminds me of when I used to read comic books a lot, which was in my college dorm, right? So that's a couple of links, but it still gets me to ANG relating to something personal to me, right? So now we've got my Uncle Chuck in my college dorm. That's kind of wild. He was never there, but I can imagine it because, unless you have aphantasia, you can imagine these types of things instantly, right? So then the next question, though, is how do I get second tone in? Well, that's actually really easy. Outside the entrance is first tone. Just inside the entrance, or like the kitchen, if you have one, is second tone. Third tone is living room, bedroom, or any unassigned room in the location. And then fourth tone's bathroom or backyard. And in the occasional situation where you have a pure fifth tone word, you can put it on the roof or in the basement. But the idea is that that's just formulaic. You have an actor, a set, a room within the set, and that gives you your pronunciation, that alone. And that's literally just, A plus B plus C. It's not even like that creative. Then the next thing is, what are the components of the character? And that's kind of like Heisig. So we call those props. So we say you've got your actor and your set and your room within the set, and that's cool. But then what do you need to remember the components? Well, you make those props, and then they all interact in some way to create the meaning. So so that's what you do. And you learn how to do that with the Henza movie method. And like I said, people throughout the course have just shared loads of scenes. So it's like if you ever don't have an idea, now with Mandarin Blueprint, you can just look in the comments section and somebody will have a good idea that for how to make them interact. But it's actually pretty easy. Once you get good at it, it's like you just say, well, okay, it means long. What do I associate with long? Well, lots of stuff. Daddy Longleggers, first thing that came to mind. So maybe that scene can have like an animated Daddy Longlegger coming in and attacking my Uncle Chuck or something, So it's like it can be fun and silly, and it works because you then have the SRS, which the SRS tells you, okay, I went to go write the character and I couldn't remember one of the components, or geez, I remember how to write it and that it means long, but was it Chang or was it Zhang, or what was it? Oh yeah, my Uncle Chuck. So let me go back into my scene and make my Uncle Chuck more prominent so that I remember that CH was the issue. So the SRS is like your safety net for if your scene wasn't perfect or whatever. And so it's so effective. And then what happens is that if you do it quickly, or sorry, I should say, once you get good at it, you can do it super quickly, and you can learn a character in like 30 seconds. And then, you review it or whatever, but you maybe spend a total of a few minutes on each character, but you still remember them because you're associating them so much with these various personal experiences, and then just ensuring that you remember it through the SRS. And if you can learn characters that quickly, that just changes the game for how quickly you can read Chinese content. So yeah.
Nice, yeah. And I think you said like there's like a safety net if the mnemonics not clear 100%. In my experience with the Heisig method, if I don't get a mnemonic perfect and like, I have a card that I'm failing a lot, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter that much. Like, if you if you have a 90% retention rate for, let's say, 3,000 characters, or even 80 or 70%, you're gonna, once you get through it, you kind of have it there, and when you go back to reading later, you're gonna see it all again anyway. And the good thing about a lot of characters is, I don't know, let's say, for example, you were struggling to come up with a mnemonic for the character for gold. Okay. So you know how it's written, you've got a little hat on the top, and then you've got the strokes and the dots and whatnot. So let's say, I don't know how to do that, but then then you look a bit later and you might learn the word for copper and steel and aluminium and sodium, and you realize on the left, and all of these is the same thing. So a lot of the time, if you just keep going, like you said, it links back to what you said about emotion, you kind of unlock it anyway. So sometimes, maybe if you're struggling with a character, if you fixate on it and you can get stuck there, or you can just put a pin in it. Maybe I don't know, if you've got like 10 days on the Yankee thing, you can just click the good button and it'll come back in 10 days, and maybe try then later when you've learned some new characters, come back to it, and you might do better than the time before. There was something else I wanted to say and I can't remember. It was about the movie method. I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a mind blank.
That's fine. Well, while you're thinking of that, I just wanted to make another comment about mnemonics in general, which is that if you've never used them before, it can sometimes seem silly, but they're so effective. Like, for example, I gave this speech a few years ago at this entrepreneurship competition in China. And, I had to give the speech in Chinese, and I was nervous about it. I was like, there's so many things to remember. But what I did was I used the travel method of remembering the speech so that I wouldn't have to read it. And basically what that is you like take you could be your current apartment or like your childhood home or something. And you just take the journey method. You journey through the house, and there are things that you place in the house that are meant to be triggers. And I still remember certain things from it. And this is years ago, and I never reviewed it. It was just like sort of, I prepared for it and then never reviewed it. But like, for example, I had this one line, which was, 如果你没有学好字的话，那你怎么可能感觉到汉语基层的逻辑和魅力呢? And what I was imagining there was so what that means is basically like, if you don't learn characters, then how can you feel the foundational logic and beauty or charm and beauty of Chinese? And what I did was I imagined my two friends, Marty and Sam, who got pretty good at spoken Chinese, but they never learned characters. And both of them said, I've hit this ceiling with it. I just can't seem to get it further. So they're the 如果你没有学好字的话, that's that part. And then 那你怎么可能感觉到汉语基层? So 基层 is foundation. So I imagine my mom's foundation makeup that for some reason I remembered, it was always on her vanity when I was a kid. And then it's giant. And then standing on top of it is 罗振宇 from 逻辑思维得到 app, and he's representing logic. And then there was this woman who I did a Chunjie documentary with like a news documentary with one time, and she was wearing a qipao and she did calligraphy, and it was just very 魅力. It was like all the Chinese 魅力 all encapsulated in her. And so like that was how I remembered logic and charm of Chinese, the foundational logic and charm of Chinese. And like I still remember that years later, just because it all connects properly. So that's what, to your point about how emotion is so much a part of how you remember the various things that are happening in the language, and how you get excited about it too.
And I guess the emotion and the nerves of actually going through and delivering a speech in Chinese as well probably helps it stick in your head somewhat.
Sure, yeah, there's a bit of that too.
Yeah. So to build on the thing when you said if you don't know, like 如果你不会字的话，那你没有可能感觉到what was it 中文的基本的魅力或基层的魅力，逻辑的魅力。Yeah, like a lot of I don't know. I was just thinking about that when I was going to it, and like I don't know. For example, if you were trying to remember the character 逻辑 for logic. I don't know, if you've read The Three Body Problem in Chinese, that's like the protagonist of book 2 and a lot of them book 3. So, you have like all you can think of this person, all the stuff he does. But like, sorry to that was a bit of a tangent. So like the example I always give thinking about characters is like if you take like Ja with like a first turn, and it's like, what does that mean? Was that I don't know. And a lot of people say you learn the word for home, you learn the word for like, come on, you can do it. You learn the word for this and that. You don't know which one's which. And then when you learn the character, you're like, oh, that's that one. And you can like start connecting words together a lot more and getting links across words. Whereas because Mandarin has so many homophones and even like same tone, same sound, there's so many of them. And then there's also minimal pairs. So like you've got same sound, different tones. There's just so many that without the characters, I could not really draw links about which sound was which word and where it connects until the characters did it all for me. So I definitely, agree. And also as well, as you get more into it, Chinese literature is pretty interesting, and there's so many cool stuff there to explore as well. So I remembered what I wanted to say before. It was about mnemonics. You reminded me. Is that I guess you kind of touched upon it. The two criticisms I hear the most, and I guess this is mostly playing devil's advocate, is that the first one is that, it just takes, I feel like I've got even more stuff to remember now. I do all this stuff. I had one character to remember. Now you're telling me I have to remember all these props and people in the room. Now I have 10 things to remember. So how's that any better than before? And the other thing is that criticism I hear is, if I have to go through all that thought process every time I have to learn a character, every time I have to write or read a character, then I'm not going to be able to read anything. That's natives don't, think about mnemonics when they do this and that. And, it just seems like it's such a roundabout way to get to the solution. Why can't I just remember it directly? And I think exactly what you said, like it might take a long time at first, but you get surprisingly good at it. And because you've got that connection, emotional connection built in there, and with past experiences and personal family members and whatnot, it's going to stick a lot longer. On the example, it's pretty fun as well.
It's like, it's not, I'm going to have to write characters hundreds of times over and over. Like, that's exciting. You know what I mean? Like, who's like, I can't wait to do that study session. Whereas if I just say like, hey, like you're going to go hang out with your uncle and, Brad Pitt, and you're going to use a badger and a spoon to get into all sorts of hijinks in your mind. It's like that. And then, by the way, and then you're going to remember these Chinese characters and laugh the whole time. It's like, I don't know, seems like a better way to go about it than just writing them over and over and then forgetting them anyway.
Death by memorization.
Yeah.
Yes. The analogy I give for kind of like how does mnemonics work? Is you just have to go through it every time. I think it's like kind of like building a house. So if you build a house, you have to put scaffolding up first to build the higher stuff. Otherwise, you're not going to have anything there. But when the house is up, you take the scaffolding there, and the house stays there. The scaffolding's gone. I think it's a pretty much a metaphor for how mnemonics work in my head.
Yeah, exactly. People ask us all the time. They're like, if I don't remember the scene, but I can write down the character successfully, like, do I have to do it again? Like, do I have to make the scene again? And I'm like, no, you did it. You success, because there's always a point where you're never going to forget. Like people sort of forget that they're like with anything. If you've seen something enough times, you're never going to forget it for the rest of your life. So it's like, it's just a stopgap between knowing nothing about it to seeing it in context enough that you remember it. And like a perfect example is duh. Like, how, you learn the character for duh. How long is it going to take you to remember it forever? Probably like you'll read a paragraph and you'll remember it forever because it's all over the place. Right. So it's like, you just have to go get somewhere from knowing nothing about this to you have a period of time where you remember it through the mnemonic and SRS. And then eventually you've seen it in words and sentences and paragraphs and TV shows and all whatever. And then you just got it. And then it doesn't matter anymore that you've forgotten the scene. Although some scenes you will remember forever because they just hit that perfect memory sort of combination. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like that for me. Like most of my Heisig stories I can't remember, but then there'll be like one or two that are just kind of silly that just kind of stick in your brain. Cool. So I think that's kind of a nice overview of Mandarin Blueprint and your movie method. And I guess anyone that's more interested, I can't remember if I said it at the start or not, but I'll leave a link to all of Phil's and Luke's, MandarinBlueprint.com, their, I don't know, Instagram, Facebook, podcast, whatnot. I'll put that all in the description. So one thing I wanted to ask quickly, maybe before we close up. So you've talked a little bit about like content, like you talked about TV shows quite a few times and podcasts. You said you listened to one about economics earlier. What's your favorite content that you like then? And I guess the two-part. One, what would you recommend for nice content to get into as a fairly new person to Chinese? And what's your favorite isn't overall that you just like in terms of pure enjoyment?
Yeah. So, I mean, to anyone who's a beginner, I would say that, it's obviously a beginner is kind of in some ways in the most difficult predicament, right? Because you need to gain some knowledge of the language to have any chance of understanding what you're immersing yourself in. But how do you do that? Now, I think we've largely solved that at Mandarin Blueprint, but, just to speak more generally, the answer is kind of just to start with stuff that's simple, like, watch Peppa Pig in Chinese or something, watch like kids shows to start off and just be fine with the fact that it's silly. And because you kind of are a kid when you're first starting off, like think of yourself that way. And then you won't judge yourself so harshly for not knowing stuff. Like we're just, when you're adults, the biggest disadvantage that adults have learning languages is that we have a much higher capacity for embarrassment than children do. Like children are just fine with not knowing something and just saying stuff wrong and just whatever. They just have no stress about it. And that's why I just met my friends, two boys, 4 and 6, and they say stuff wrong all the time. They don't care. Like they're just being kids. And so if you can have that type of attitude, try to find content that doesn't have a lot of overall words, like you watch, I don't know, The Matrix dubbed into Chinese, there's going to be like 9,000 unique words. But if you have some kids show, either natively Chinese or dubbed into Chinese, it's probably going to have maybe 1,500 unique words. So like something that is simple, visually stimulating, has subtitles, do that at the beginning. And then you still always, the whole time, you have to follow your interest. Like if you're bored by something, stop, because boredom is going to kill your motivation moving forward. So just be okay with at the beginning, just being like, I wanted to watch 5 minutes of this, and that's all I could take. Fine. Just do it every day. Just do like whatever it is you do the first 2 minutes of it or the first 5 minutes of it. And eventually the habit is formed, the repetition is formed, and then you'll go longer and all of that. So for beginners, I wouldn't say that there's like one thing that I'm a huge fan of Graded Readers. Obviously, I love the Mandarin Companion guys. I love what they're doing at Chairman's Bow and stuff like that. I love all that stuff. But I also, I think that you have to find something you like. As for something that I'm into now, I actually just discovered this YouTube channel it's actually called Voice of America. But the reason why I find it interesting is it's an entirely Mandarin Chinese news source, but funded by the American government. So it's like everything that I read in the Chinese news that is, sort of coming from that particular angle and is a bit more, it must be this angle, the party line, as it were. It's amazing and fascinating to hear the opposite. It's all like Chinese scholars. They're just in America, and they're, if there's some news story, you get to hear the other side of it by watching this news channel. And so obviously that's more of like an advanced thing, because the news can always, every day that I watch the news, despite years and years of immersion, I still will always find something in the news that I'm like, what was that? I didn't understand that. But still, it's like, that is, that's been really fascinating to me to watch that, because you read these news stories over and over in China, and like they start to, you start to get this repetition of like, oh yeah, they have to follow the party line in this way, and they can't really talk about this. So it's just cool to suddenly see a news channel. It's like, we're going to talk about all this stuff that you guys aren't talking about. So it's just interesting. So yeah.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. I guess one of the, I don't know if it exists in other languages, or I guess so, but one unique problem with Mandarin, at least compared to English, is if you get in like involved in like news and stuff, there's like all these common characters that you learn really early on, and then they just decide to completely change them for a different one in formal situations, which you get with Mandarin. So I don't know, like, or sometimes it uses a character that you already know and uses it for a different meaning in a formal setting. Like, I don't know.
That's studying ancient Chinese can help with that a lot. I was surprised at how helpful studying ancient Chinese was. So I happened to have a really good teacher at Sichuan University for my ancient Chinese class. Most of my Sichuan University classes drove me crazy, but this one helped. And like learning a bit of ancient Chinese is very helpful for knowing some basics, like some basic words that get used in a different way. You learn a lot of that, and it helps a lot with Chengyu, because like you see a lot of Chengyu.
If you read the original story,
yeah. So like that, the original story, or sometimes it's not the original. Like sometimes it's the original story, but sometimes it's just that the origin of the meaning of the like third character, it comes from ancient Chinese, and the other three were from modern Chinese, and it's just a relatively new idiom, and that's the idea there. So I would, that's obviously for advanced people, but if you feel the sort of, if the spirit moves you to learn ancient Chinese, I wouldn't discourage that, like, because it's kind of it's interesting, and it does have effects on modern Chinese. So yeah,
and it'll help you understand costume dramas as well, which is why
exactly.
Because I was watching
who wants to understand them, but yes.
like King's War and like Three Kingdoms and all that stuff. Like if you get the scenes where they speak in the courtroom, it's kind of like the pseudo half classical, half modern Chinese sort of thing that can be quite hard to understand. And
yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think it is. Well, if you're interested in either Chinese history or Chinese philosophy, I definitely think it's interesting from that point of view. And because they always like capture like this nugget of like Chinese wisdom in like a story that seems completely irrelevant to what they're trying to say until my teacher explains it to me. what the actual meaning? Like, they're like, what do you think Mengzi was trying to say? I was like, I think he was saying this. It's like, that's a really interesting thought. You're wrong, but it's interesting thought. I was like, okay. Yeah, I completely missed the point on that one, But it's really satisfying. I was saying this to someone the other day, when you actually read a story in classical Chinese, and then you see like the phrase or the Chengyu used in like modern Chinese, and you're like, oh well, snap! I know the original thing. Like I was watching something, and then I think my friend said like, and I was like, dude, I've read the original like passage where that was from, and they were like going to explain what it means. They're like, 不用了，不用了，我已经知道那个. And it was just like so like it was almost like a click moment. And even when I was like reading books and novels, like sometimes like there's not even sometimes, I guess in novels they like to reference a lot of historical events and stuff, that it comes up quite a lot. And even in like, music, like I was listening to some Mayday songs, and you get like stuff from classical appear in some of the lyrics there and stuff. And if you know a little bit, even if it's not that much, you can start to like see it in other stuff used today, which is really cool. It's not like Shakespeare maybe, where you learn it and it's barely like touched upon anywhere,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Usually there was like a thing or a couple of points from a ancient Chinese story, or like this is what Kongzi was saying, when he was teaching this class one time, and he's giving these bits of wisdom, and like there's so many four character phrases in ancient Chinese in these little like essays / poems / lessons. It's kind of like the border between these different classifications sometimes doesn't work as much for ancient Chinese, but oftentimes it's like 4 characters, 4 characters, 4 characters, 4 characters, and then like you learn that, and many of them, maybe all of them became Chengyu, or like one of them did or whatever, or it became an 8 characters Suhua or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty cool to learn that stuff. I mean, obviously it's a bit dense, but it can be fascinating. And you remember, when you're learning ancient Chinese, you don't have to reproduce it, right? Like it's like, I mean, you just need to try to understand it, but you're never going to have to speak like that, because that obviously you learn a Chengyu or whatever, but like it's not like if you're learning ancient Chinese, you're going to have to suddenly, you know, start giving speeches in ancient Chinese or something. So
there was a period of a few weeks when I was texting my friends from Taiwan, I started trying to like text like that, and they were like, just stop being weird. I'm like, oh, fair enough.
Yeah, it's good to have friends like that who will help you out in the native language. Just be like, yeah, no, that's just weird.
Yeah. Well, one other thing that's quite interesting, I don't know, because you mentioned like Chengdu like a few times. I don't know if you speak like any like Shizunese or anything, but so just going back to the classical Chinese thing, a lot of the time, because I guess I got the frame of I've studied Cantonese for 2 years before I started Mandarin. So if I'm like reading something, and you know the way certain characters are used, like for example, 同意 的 tong means like, or it'll be like 我同你, like me and you. It's used like that in literary Chinese. That's similar to how it's used in Cantonese, and also like 认识的识. Like if you say like 我识字, it's like I know characters, but in Mandarin we'd use 会. But in Cantonese, it's actually sit, which is the same character as the one that's used in literary now. So, and then sometimes it's like the Mandarin one might have things that are like closer to what classical was like. So you can like see elements of what's being preserved differently in different parts of like different Chinese languages, which is, if you're like a language nerd like me and Phil are, then it's pretty interesting to look at. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about any TV shows you like in particular?
Oh, I mean, you know, what I tend to do is I just tend to like turn on a series. I gotta tell you, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the Chinese dramas. It's just, you know, they're a bit melodramatic a lot of the time. But I always just try to recognize it. It's like there's a story here, and they're just trying to get you through the story and see if you can get the beats and just understand the story beats. Like Western shows that I've seen, like, I don't know, I've never seen a Chinese show that I was like, wow, this is like Breaking Bad level good, right? Like, so I do feel like I should say that. But on the other hand, it doesn't matter, because you can find, like, story is such a basic thing about the human experience. So like, I think most people can conceptualize the basic beats of a story, even if it's just visual. It's like, all right, well, can't totally understand what they're saying, but clearly this guy likes this girl and he's trying to impress her. So, you know, he's talking to his mom, and his mom doesn't approve of her. And like, that's the other thing too, is that sometimes like it's the things that they're going through in the show. From my Western eyes, it feels contrived, but it's partially that there's some more, I don't know, I guess certain things are more repressed in China when it comes to, like, I don't know if repressed is the right word.
What they're allowed to film about?
Some of that, that's definitely an element, because like creativity gets a little bit stifled. But then there's also the way that family influences how people behave. So like the key plot point of many shows will be like, well, my mom doesn't approve of the guy I want to date, you know, or whatever. And it's like, okay, all right, then. And it has this feeling of like, and she's like, you can't date him because he's too low status. And you're like, okay, this feels like it's from the West in the 1950s. You know, it sort of feels a little bit behind the times. But on the other hand, sometimes that can be the case. But I would say, I mean, like, I'll tell you this, I liked watching 爱情公寓when I was in my like intermediate stage, because it's just like
that's
Friends.
Like the love. I heard that described as like the Chinese version of Friends or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just simple, although there's a lot of things you can learn from it. Like there's a lot of great slice of life phrases you can learn from it. And it's kind of, and then of course there would be moments that are really complicated. There'd be moments in it where it was like, oh, they just did a thing where one of the characters went off on a big long speech and it was pretty advanced. But most of the time it's just like, well, she likes him, and oh my God, what are we going to do when we run into this conflict that's just like every other sitcom, you know, just sort of silly but simple. And so therefore you can kind of chill out and just enjoy it. I'm kind of a news junkie these days. I don't watch as many TV shows, but like that's just because I'm just curious about what's going on in the world from like a Chinese perspective. And then now recently with this new YouTube channel, also the American perspective in Chinese, which is kind of, interesting.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think a lot of, going back to the TV show thing, sometimes the pacing is a bit off, should we say. Like they drag them on for like 100 episodes because they want more TV sponsors, and it gets annoying. Like the TV sponsor wants them to drag it out so they can stay on the airtime for as long as possible, and it gets stuff like that, and it can get very bad when all that political stuff gets involved. But there are some really good Chinese TV shows that are maybe like 10 to 12 episodes long, that like focus are really short, and actually some of them are actually quite dark and a lot of like quite modern like themes and stuff. So there's one in particular that I have in mind that's set in Guangdong province. So there's little bits of Cantonese, which was not loads, maybe like one line every like 10 minutes or something. But it's about these three kids. It's called The Bad Kids.
Okay.
And it's based off this novel. And it's about these three kids that when they're hiking, they accidentally like they're like filming and they're like playing and stuff in the mountains, and they see behind them, they see like these two people get pushed off the top of the mountain, and they accidentally film a murder, and then they kind of like unravels and shit goes down. And I'm not going to say much more for spoilers, but that's like the start of episode 1. And then like everything becomes intertwined and quite messy quite quickly, and that's like 12 episodes long, and that's really entertaining. For Taiwanese content, there's a lot more that they can talk about. There's no censorship, so they've got TV shows that revolve around incidents like the death penalty and stuff. There was a famous shooting in Taipei Metro attack in 2015 where some guy got out a fruit knife and just started like slashing people. This is in real life, happened in Taipei Metro, and injured like maybe like 30 people, killed like 2, 3, 4 people, and it was all over the headlines because it was just like, I can't remember what they said, Suiji Shara, and like there was no motive. It was just random killing people. And then later there was talk about whether they should include the death sentence. What should the sentence be? And then it was following this. And then the TV show kind of took a similar example, inspired by that, and was like following all the families of each side, and like what was the motive? Like, is the person ill or not? And like, are they insane? Are they blah blah blah? And they're following the defense lawyers and all this stuff. And that was quite interesting as well. So there are some like proper rubbish ones out there, but there's also some pretty interesting ones, I think, as well. But,
I guess you're right. I should have looked for more Taiwanese stuff, because I tend to, I'm in China, so I tend to just turn on the TV and just watch whatever's on. Or just, I'll go into Youku or whatever and just see what they're offering for TV shows. But I tend to, just put something on and then just kind of be okay with whether or not it's like, I've just always been fine with, okay, this isn't the most amazing TV show, but I just want to be able to follow the plot, so that's my goal. I just want to be like, what happened here? And like, you just end up getting a lot of stuff. But yeah, I should look for more stuff. That's a good piece of advice. I think the excuse in my mind I've always had, which is like, it's always good to find the things in your mind that are sort of like, they're kind of nonsense, but you're letting it win. So like, I would go, well, I don't want to watch stuff from Taiwan because they're going to have, more Taiwanese words, and I don't want to confuse myself since I'm not in Taiwan. But like, that's nonsense, because obviously it's mostly the same. Like, it's like the Mandarin in Taiwan. Yeah, there are some words they use that are different, and they pronounce things slightly differently in certain instances. But I'm actually surprised when I watch Taiwanese stuff. Like, it's like, yeah, I completely understand this. This is, it's still Mandarin for sure. And so,
apart from when they speak Taiwanese and the comprehension just goes.
Yeah. When they go right into dialectical stuff, but yeah, totally. I mean, and part of it though, I'm just, another thing that I was thinking of is that I like to listen to Duladal, which has, loads of content, and it's podcast based, and you've got just everything, like all sort of psychology, economics, philosophy, how to build habits, all that stuff. And it's a kind of one of those apps. It's a lot of free content meant to try to upsell you to buy courses and stuff. But I love it. I think it's great. I think there's lots of awesome. And what's really good about it is that almost everything has a transcript, so you can listen and read at the same time. So like that's another good one. And so like big thing for me in TV is just that I'm just not that into TV. Like so that's another thing about it, is if you're into whatever you're into, just go for it. If you like listening to podcasts, then try to get into podcasts early. Start with things like slow Chinese if you need to, or start with here's a great one, 狗兄有话说, which is one of the oldest podcasts run by a Chinese guy, and he's got this very clear accent, but he's not sounding too formal. He speaks relatively slowly, and it's just kind of slice of life stuff. It's nothing like, he's not talking about anything all that complicated, but he's that's a good example of a podcast to get into. Point is, whatever content you like to check out in your native language, try to find that in Chinese. If you're not that into television, then don't force yourself to be into it. I mean, you can watch it sometimes. But yeah.
Yeah, no, good advice. Cool. And it reminds me, I've been meaning to make like a top 10 podcast videos in Chinese for ages, and haven't done it because I'm just too busy. Thank you so much for your time, Phil, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap this up?
No, just check out mandarinblueprint.com, folks.
Sure, and I'll leave a link to all that good stuff in the description. And if you've actually made it to this part of the interview, thank you for watching the whole thing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.